Rollers, my name is Emma and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing one of my favorite videos to do, and it is the end of year reading survey. I always see Kayla from Books and Lala and Gabby from Gabby Reads do it. I have no idea who created this tag, and I think I did delete a question this year, just a heads up, but I will put all the questions that I answered down below, and I will also link Gabby and Kayla's video this year because, like I said, I always see it on their channel. I want to say that this is my third year doing it, but I was rewatching last year's and I swear to God I did it 2 years ago, but according to that and according to my playlist, I didn't. So I guess this is really my second time doing it. And this video also this year is going to replace my top books of the year video, mainly just because the end of the year, ooh, look at that hair. I'm sorry. I have like a huge flyaway. That won't go down. Ugh. Oh well. What was I saying? Oh yeah, it's gonna replace my end of the year, or my best books of the year, because this week has completely gotten away from me. It's like the 30th, I believe. And this is the last day of like my winter break that I'm home alone. And I don't really love to film when other people are home. So I decided to just narrow down the 4 videos I want to do before January and do those. I have a couple of videos that I'll do in early January, but I'm gonna get rid of my favorite books of the year. I haven't done my least favorite books in the year in the last couple of years. I just don't love those videos. I got rid of, like, I was gonna do most surprising, most disappointing, and like a DNF video, but I got rid of that too. So instead I'm doing the reading survey, my reading statistics, my January wheel of TBR, and my reading and writing goals. And that's just what we're gonna get for the first like couple weeks of January. I have a couple other videos, like I said, that I want to do at the beginning of the year, but we're just not gonna do some of the traditional ones this year, and maybe we'll do them next year. I don't know. We'll see. But as always, my questions and answers are on my phone, so if you see me look down, that's why. But let's get started. So the first question is, how many books did you read this year and did you meet your goal? This year, I believe it came out to, I read 40 books, which is the highest number of books I think I've ever read. We probably can thank the global pandemic for that, as well as just thanking the fact that I really discovered Audible this year. So I did read 40 books. I actually doubled my goal. Every year my reading goal is the last 2 numbers of the year. So this year for 2020 it was 20 books. So I was able to double my reading this year, and I did the majority of it before June. I did a lot of my reading between January and June, and I am still struggling with like a 6-month reading slump, which you guys will see a little bit more of in my stats video, which will come probably later this week. The second question is, what was your most read genre? My most read genre was romance, with 14 of the books that I read this year being romance. Again, we'll go more into genres in my stats video, which I actually think I'm filming after this one. So the next question is, what was the shortest and longest book you read this year? The shortest book I read was 9 Days and 9 Nights by Katie Contogo, which came out to, if I could find it, came out to 263 pages, and I actually read that in December. And the longest book I read this year was One Day by David Nichols, which came out to 435 pages. The next question is, what is your favorite book that you read that was published in 2020? And I cannot for the life of me find my copy of this book, but my favorite book that I read that came out in 2020 was One of Us is Next by Karen M. McManus. This series is a little bit controversial, and I know that. It is the second book, and I think it's a duology. It might become a trilogy or a series, but as of last time I looked, it's a duology. It's a little controversial, but I really enjoyed it, and I think it might have been the only book I read that was published in 2020. Oh wait, no, that's a lie. I did read 2 good book of the months, but I did like that one more. Oh, actually I read a few, because the next question is another 2020. What is your favorite debut book in 2020? So of the books I read that were published in 2020, only one of them was a debut novel. It wasn't even a novel, it was a debut memoir, but it was The Rowell Diaries by Hilary Burton Morgan. I absolutely loved this audiobook. I am not a huge memoir-y person, but I loved it. It was Hillary Burton Morgan, if you don't know, is Peyton from One Tree Hill, which is one of my comfort shows.
Laker Scott, will you go to prom with me?
So it was so cool to like hear some of her stuff. I believe, and I will link it up below if I can figure out, or up above if I can figure out which wrap up it was in, but I believe I did go more in depth in a wrap up about this book, so I will link that down below. The next question is, what was your favorite book not published in 2020 that you read this year? And that was Michigan versus the Boys for me by Carrie S. Allen. This book destroyed me. Absolutely destroyed me in the best way possible. I love it. It's amazing. It was a slow start, but it was chef's kiss, 10 out of 10, would recommend. The next question is, what book lived up to the hype? And of the 4 books that I read on my 5-star prediction list, this is the only book to get above a 3-star. So I really do not know my reading taste, apparently. I have one more book left to read from that 5-star prediction. But this one actually was a 5-star read, and it was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. I put this book on to my 5-star prediction book because of the fact that so many people raved and adored this book, and I really enjoyed it. I had some issues with it, which I believe I talked about in my March wrap up, but I did really enjoy it. I gave it 5 stars. It lived up to the hype. It makes me excited to read more Christina Lauren books, and I did want to have Christina Lauren be my answer to another question later on in this video, but I will explain why they are not that answer later on in the book or in this video. But the Unhoneymooners did live up to the hype for me. So the next question is the opposite. What book did not live up to the hype for you? And this is actually the first book that I read in 2020, and I did enjoy it. It was a good book, but I had hyped it up so much in my head because it is something that I really thought I would enjoy and I was really excited about, but it just didn't live up to the hype for me, which was The Broken Girls by Simone St. James. I really thought that it would be a little spookier than it was. I was really intrigued by the premise. I do kind of like the ghosty historical fiction kind of things, and it did not get me. And I also, like, there were just, I don't know, maybe I need to reread it because there were just questions I was left with, and it felt like there were too many like parallel storylines for me. I think I ended up giving it like 3.5 stars. It just didn't live up for the hype for me. I know a lot of people love it. It's not a book that I wouldn't recommend. It just isn't like the first book I would recommend that I read this year. The next question is, what book felt like the biggest accomplishment to you? Like many people, I always want to put the longest book I read as my biggest accomplishment. But as you guys saw earlier, even my longest book this year was not super long. But this book was a book that I would have DNF'd if it was not in my 5-star prediction video. I did feel that in order to really finish that 5-star prediction roundup, I needed to finish this book, and it took everything in me not to DNF it. So with that being said, Landline by Rowell feels like my biggest accomplishment this year. I detested this book with every fiber of my being. I did not like any of the characters except for 2 who had the smallest roles in the book. I could not stand this book. If it had not been a 5-star prediction, because it's a concept that I would have loved. It's about television, and it has this like magical realism, Hallmark rom-com storyline to it, but it did not work for me at all. Hated it. I know there are people out there who love it and will probably want to fight me in the comments about this book, but I hated this book. I would not recommend it to a single soul ever. So the next question was, who was your favorite character from a book you read in 2020? This character is such a badass. She is so brave, so strong, just like a character that I wanted to root for through and through from the beginning of the novel, and that was Michigan from Michigan versus the Boys. I loved her. Like, she is, if I ever have a daughter, like, that is a book character I would want my daughter to look up to. I cannot sing this book's praises enough, and like the villains were hated enough, and it was just like, oh, amazing. 10 out of 10. One of my favorite books of all time. So the next question is, who was your least favorite character you read this year? And I have two answers. One is the main hockey coach in this book. He feels like he should be this advocate for Michigan, and he fails her so many times and is just such a hateable character that's written so well that I loved it. Like, I loved how much I hated this character and how mad, how like physically mad I got at him. Like, books do not normally make me cry, and I was so mad that I was like crying at this character. So I think it was just such a well-written character. So that is why he is my most hated, one of my most hated characters this year. And then for a main character this year, my most hated character was Molly Barlow from the 99 Days duology. I have never sat and yelled at a book character the way that I yelled at Molly Barlow, specifically in 99 Days, but there were some like moments in 9 Days and 9 Nights as well. But I've never hated a main character the way that I hated her. And I'm not sure, like, this is definitely a book that's on the younger end of YA, young adult fiction. So it might also be that it's written for kids who are just coming into young adult and leaving middle grade, going into young adult. So that might have been part of it too. Like, she just was very immature. But oh my god, I hated Molly Barlow so much. I want to put a disclaimer before I talk about this question. I am one of those people who like are very dense when it comes to thrillers. I never am able to predict the ending of a thriller, and that like even goes for like TV thrillers. Like, my mom can sit and like guess who was the murderer on like Law and Order and Criminal Minds and all of those shows. I'm bad at that. So this question was, what was your most shocking book moment of 2020? And I actually am going to do two thrillers. The first one was Home Before Dark by Riley Sagar. I filmed a wrap up for November and just never ended up editing it and putting it up. But I talked about in my wrap up that you guys never saw that this answer, the wrap up of the book, I had predicted all of the twists at one point during the book, but was never able to put it all together. And the way that it came together just like blew my mind. So Home Before Dark is a very shocking ending to me. But the other one for me is The Night Swim by Megan Golden. So I picked this book up when I first decided I wanted to get out of my reading rut. And one of my best friends who has a bookstagram, I will link her down below, loved this book. And I started reading it, and I literally texted her and I was like, hey, you read The Night Swim, right? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, does it get better? Because I'm not really liking it. And she's like, I loved it. And I was like, is the answer super predictable? And she's like, I didn't think it was. So I decided to keep reading it. And yes, I was on the right track, but I was going the wrong direction for the answer. And when it all came together, especially like the ultimate whodunit, I was like, no way. Oh my god, this makes so much sense. I really like that ending trope in thrillers too, but like, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the ending. I didn't really enjoy the book. But those were my two shocking book moments of the year. The next question was, who was your one true pair of the year? This one was actually kind of hard for me. I feel like every year I'm able to find someone, which is why I'm convinced I did this, because I remember like 3 years ago, Simon and Blue would have been my OTP. Like, what in the world happened to that video? I like can remember doing it right now. Oh my god. Sorry, I just had something happened in my brain. But I like romances, but sometimes I feel like I just don't always hold attachments to the couples, especially because, like I said, it was my highest rated genre, so sometimes they all kind of meld together. So while I was going through the books I read, I ended up deciding that I would do Olive and, oh my god, what's the name? Olive and Ethan from the Unhoneymooners. My biggest issue with this book is that people sell it as a hate to love romance, and it's like a one-sided hate to love. I much prefer like when it's two-sided hate to love, but I did enjoy it. They are a couple that stands out in my mind. They have moments that stand out in my mind more so than a lot of the other romances I read this year, so I am going to give it to Olive and Ethan from the Unhoneymooners. The next question is, what did you feel was the best written book of the year? For me, it is actually going to be Home Before Dark by Riley Sagar. I think that the way this book was written, with the parallels of what's happening versus the book and how he interwove everything and the ways that it all came together, was just so well written, and it was scary. Like, there were times where I did have to like pause my audiobook that I was using to listen to it and like take a step back. I really enjoyed the way he wrote this book and would recommend it to other people. So I don't know, I'm not a huge judger of craft. I'm much more a judger of how I feel about the plot and the characters, but I do think that that was a really well written book. So the next question is, what book did you push the most on people this year? I'm gonna have to go with the Playbook series, which is, so far I've read Intercepted, which, just like my other book earlier, I don't know where my copy of Intercepted is, and Fumbled by Alexa Martin. It is a series, it's a standalone series, which are my favorite kind of series. It's like low grade smutty, so like there are some smutty moments, but it's not like boom in your face smutty. The characters are interesting, the storylines are interesting. I did very much enjoy these books this year. I think I recommended them to a couple of people, so I'm gonna go with the Playbook series by Alexa Martin. The next question are, what are your favorite book covers of the year? So I'm actually gonna do my top 3 with number 3, 2, and 1 going downward, and they're not always the most beautiful, but they are the ones that caught my eye the most. So the first one is The Babysitter Coven by Kate Williams. If you know anything about me, I am not a huge fantasy reader, and this screams fantasy in my mind, like Coven and all of that. But I saw it at Barnes & Noble and I couldn't leave the store without buying it. Like, I was so attracted to the cover. I just love the colors and it's so well drawn and everything, that this would be probably my 3rd favorite cover book that I read this year. My second one is Home Before Dark by Riley Sagar. I love the aesthetic of this book. The greens and the chandelier just give off the most haunted house feels that I can think of. I loved it. 10 out of 10. Beautiful cover. Absolutely adored it. And then my favorite cover of the year is Michigan versus the Boys. Like, I don't know if you guys can see it, but like there's the houses and she's like walking across a frozen pond and you see this like girl, and then the like gray colors just fit the mood of the book. Even like the ombre on the letters just like do it for me. I loved this cover. I'm gonna pause my camera really quick and switch clips and I'll be right back. Sorry, my camera sometimes doesn't like when the memory card goes above like 4 gigabytes or something. And I did that, so I just had to like turn it off and turn it back up. So the next question was, what was your favorite movie adaptation that you saw / read this year? So I saw 2 movie adaptations from what I could find. I went through and I looked at all the books that became movies in 2020, and it looks like or like TV shows, and it looks like I've only seen, well, I've seen 3, but I've only read 1 of them, so there was an obvious answer. But I did watch most of Teeny Pretty Things or Pretty Little Things on Netflix, the ballerina one. I also saw the remake of Little Women. I've never read either of those books, But I did watch and reread this year P.S. I Still Love You by Jenny Han. This is my least favorite book in the trilogy, and I did not love the movie. So it's hard to say that this is my favorite book adaptation that I read this year, but at the end of the day, it's true. This was my favorite book adaptation that I read this year and saw this year because it was the only one that I had both read and seen.
Alright, editing Emma here. So I just realized that I actually watched a fourth movie adaptation, and I'm going to change my answer. My favorite movie adaptation this year was Adaptation of Lily's A Book of Dares. I think they did a really, really good job with that one, and I actually did prefer the adaptation over P.S. I Still Love You. So I'm going to change my answer to Dash and Lily's Book of Dares.
The next question is the book that made you cry the most. And if you guys are shocked by this answer, you obviously have not been watching this video because it is Michigan versus the Boys. I cried because I was so mad. I'm not a big crier in real life and through media. Movies don't always make me cry. TV doesn't often make me cry. Books don't often make me cry. But I was so mad. I was reading this, like, I remember finishing this and reading it and like sitting on my couch reading it while I was watching like news conferences about COVID, like that, like it's just gonna, I feel like this is a moment. This book is one of my all-time favorite books, but like reading the ending is also gonna play such a huge part in like my history or my memory of how history played during this year. But I just, I loved it. I almost feel like I should change my recommendation because I feel like I'm pushing this book on anyone who's watching this, but I didn't recommend it to any of my friends because it's none of my friends' types of books. So the next question is kind of the opposite, but what book made you laugh the most? This one I struggled with because much like I don't cry, I don't feel like I laugh out loud to books a lot, but I do feel like the Playbook series, again by Alexa Martin, often have funny moments in them, and I do kind of chuckle to myself while I read these ones. But it also might be that I just read this one recently, so it's just stuck in my mind that it's a kind of funny book. So the next question is, who is your new favorite author this year? So for me, or like a new favorite author that you discovered this year. So for me, a new favorite author, I need to have read more than one book by them, which is why Christina Lauren cannot be my new favorite author. The only book I read by them was The Unhoneymooners. So I looked through new authors that I read and who I read multiple of. Read Katie Contugo, didn't love her books. I read Riley Sagar, I loved one. I was like, about the other one. And then I realized I'd read 2 Alexa Martin books this year. So Alexa Martin is going to be my 2020 new favorite author. Really enjoyed her books, and I added the rest of the Playbook series to my top of the TBR Amazon wishlist. The next question is, what was your biggest guilty pleasure of the year? I think I've talked about this in the past. I don't love saying that like a book is my guilty pleasure because like why would you feel guilty about what you're consuming media wise? But I'm gonna end up going with the Fake Dating series by Eden Finley. They are male-male fake dating romances. They're very cheesy. They're very easy to go through. I listened to them all on Audible, which was kind of weird, but I did enjoy them. I listened to them over like the course of like a month or something, and they were good, but I don't know if I would re-listen to them or really recommend them to a lot of people. They were just kind of like something I'm glad I experienced this year. The next question was, what was your favorite book you reread this year? I think P.S. I Still Love You is like the only book I reread this year. And like I said, it is my least favorite of the trilogy, but I do love this trilogy. To All the Boys I Loved Before is up there as one of my all-time favorite books ever. So I did enjoy getting to reread P.S. I Still Love You. The next question was, were you happy with your reading year this year? I was so happy with the first half of my reading year. I want to say that before like June, I think I read like 25 or 30 books. And then it's just like from June until now, I have been in such a reading rut. Like I haven't wanted to read. I've been too tired to read. Nothing's holding my attention. So was super excited, super happy with the beginning of 2020's reading, and then fell off the wagon at the end. So it was a decent reading year. I did enjoy it, but it just wasn't my favorite. But yeah, that was my 2020 reading survey. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will be back soon with some more videos. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye, Worlders. Hold on. Ew, could you guys hear that? Just a compliment. Why shouldn't I have dropped that book?